Welcome to In This Corner with Cyrus Fees. I'm Cyrus, and on this episode, we are taking a little bit of a pivot here, taking a little bit of a turn and going from our traditional mixed martial arts, these great legends that we've had here, and we're dipping into another sport that we haven't gone into before, and a man that really transcends both, and that is Tony Parrish, of course, former NFL football player, 8-year veteran of the NFL, Bears, 49ers, Cowboys, second-round pick at the University of Washington, All-Pro in 2003 on the 49ers All-2000s team. But then when you switch over to the fight sports side, he's a host, a big part of the team for Combat Go TV, Bushido Battleground. You've seen him as an interviewer, commentator, does a little bit of everything. So it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Tony Parrish to the broadcast. How are you, Tony?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Cyrus.
I hope that was a good enough intro, man. I hope I got everything in there. Did I miss something?
9 years in the NFL.
Oh, okay. I shorted you a year. That's all
right. That's all right.
well, Tony, obviously, man, it's great to catch up with you. You and I have worked together before with Combat Go and Jungo and the crew over there, over in some different trips. And it's good to see you again, man. How is COVID going in California right now? I know you guys have been pretty much on high alert for a long time now. How's the virus doing now?
You know, in California, as you said, we've definitely been on high alert. It's starting. It's on the rise again. But then we flattened it out last week. Last week we had a few days where at least our numbers were sort of steady. Not like they're great. They're still pretty bad, but at least they aren't increasing. And so everyone is just trying to find out where this new normal is, just like the rest of the country. You know, California is a very large state. I think we stretch from somewhere like New Jersey down to South Carolina or something like that. So it's difficult to get everyone sort of on the same page with all the counties. It's
a lot of resistance out there too. I mean, I'm down here in Tennessee, and there's a lot of folks that aren't willing to budge, man. So I mean,
there's a lot of resistance. I think part of the problem is, as Americans, we need to look at this with a wider view. You know, start looking at this internationally. There are a lot of other countries that have also had this problem, and look at what's worked, you know? Yeah. So I think that's one of the times when our American exceptionalism sort of has done us a disservice right now, because there's a blueprint out there. We even sat and watched countries like Italy and Spain and France, who had a really hard time, now have things under control and sort of go back to normal. And for whatever reason, our stubbornness, we just won't quite seem to do it.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. And I think it starts at the top, and hopefully we can get people on the same page, and we can kind of calm this thing down so we can get that normal. Because if we don't, if we're half in, we're half out, this thing's going to drag on for who knows how long. You know, I mean, it's tough.
Yeah, it's going to drag on, and and unfortunately, at the same pace we're going, more than likely, we're going to see a significant increase between now and end of the year.
Yeah, you're right. Well, you know, one thing that I think has kind of calmed people a little bit is the return of sports, as sports have kind of come back in to our lives again. Obviously, the NBA doing a great job down in the bubble. I mean, the way they've handled it has been spectacular. Baseball's starting to get there. UFC and MMA has done a really good job, truthfully, the way they've handled things and put everybody in a bubble and kind of isolated everybody. But how about the NFL? Now, the NFL, obviously, where you came from, where you spent a lot of time in your career, they're about ready to come back at the time that we're taping this right now. How do you think they've handled everything so far?
You know, it's difficult. I've heard conversations on both sides. You have some players who say, okay, the NFL, you hire some consultants. Let's make sure we actually hit all the things on that checklist before we start again. And then you have other people who think the NFL has sort of taken those steps and those precautions. We shall see. I know the NFL is going to be very difficult. Yeah. There are a bunch of guys who have opted out for the season, but the NFL brings along a very interesting problem in the sense that it's a close quarters game. There are a lot of people involved. You know, you're literally
the numbers by themselves. You're right.
Exactly. Yeah. You're really going to have, say, you have 65 players and some coaches, and then plus some people within the organization. So you're literally going to have to, in some sense, social distance 100 people per team for a season. So now you're looking at 3,200 people, right, which is going to be across the country, which is going to be very difficult. So, you know, I love the game. I'd like to see him play. I just don't know that it's that it can really be done. I think
Yeah.
if baseball has had some issues in the first couple of weeks, mainly because they weren't necessarily in a bubble like basketball, the NFL is going to have a harder time with that. Hopefully, they have a lot of rapid tests, and they're testing guys constantly, and that people taking it serious. And you're not going to make it through a season unscathed. There are definitely going to be some things that pop up. So it's going to be management. You have to manage those issues, and we'll see how far we can get through a season, because unlike baseball and basketball finishing up their season, football is trying to play a full season. It's not abbreviated. So it's going to be very difficult. You have training camps, that are starting at end of July, August.
Yeah.
And, as everyone knows, the football season goes through the new year.
Yeah, so it's a long season. You're right. I mean, it's not 3 months max like you're going to get with basketball, 3.5 months. It's a long time when you talk about training camp. Obviously, I think the preseason's out, but you're right, man. It's a lot of people to account for. You're talking about basically 5-6 times the people of a basketball team. I mean, it seems mildly impossible, but I'm interested to see how it happens too. And I definitely look out for those players out there and see how they're handled. And it's going to be back and forth.
Exactly. And then personally myself, just as a player, I have a lot of concerns, especially for our linemen. Offensive, defensive linemen, the guys that are in closest quarters, are guys who may not respond very well to a respiratory event.
True.
Big guys there, and and you never know what your family history is like. You've had a lot of guys opt out because of family history, or just because of concerns and with their own family. So it's, I think we'll all be prayed up for the season and have our fingers crossed, and at some point, that decisions are made not for necessarily the benefit of just entertaining the people in television money, but that player safety is of optimal concern.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's what a crazy time, 2020 here. Let's go back a little bit, way before 2020. Not too way. Well, you grew up in Huntington Beach, California. We don't have to go all the way back to that year.
Way before.
We grew up in Huntington Beach, and I think the interesting thing about that is, you were basically growing up around the same time that some of the godfathers of MMA were coming up, like your T.O.s, your Tank Abbotts. Those are two guys that were prominent coming out of Huntington Beach, the Huntington Beach bad boy, T.O.s.
Wow.
I just got to wonder, I mean, do you remember hearing about these guys back in the day? Did you ever have any run-ins? Did you ever see these guys around? Obviously, it's a big area, but I'm just kind of wondering, did you ever kind of hear about these guys when you were growing up there in Huntington Beach?
Yeah, growing up, you always heard about rumblings. Back then, it wasn't the UFC. It was just I'm trying to remember the name. I forgot the name of what it was called back then. And you hear about this, these bare knuckle fighters or these ultimate fighters, these no holds barred fights going on. And I have to tell you, there were always rumblings. And growing up in Huntington Beach, I inspired by it, I saw some pretty good street fights.
No doubt. Growing up, did you have any sort of martial arts training? Were you in your taekwondo, karate, anything like that, like a lot of us were?
I didn't have any martial arts training. I was one of those kids who would put on my pajama bottoms and watch Bruce Lee movies and make noises and kick and punch in the mirror. I was one of those kids. And I was always interested in martial arts. And at the time, I didn't have a lot of time, really, because I played a lot of sports. Yeah. Growing up, I played, baseball, basketball. Soccer was my main thing for a long time. I played volleyball, cross country, track. So if there was a sport, I wanted to play it, and I didn't really have time for the martial arts aspect of it. So for me, it was, I loved old martial arts films and, and hearing rumors of these guys doing this crazy training, which we didn't know exactly what it was. So that's what it was like for me growing up in Huntington Beach. And then from there, once Hoist won the title there, then things just started evolving. And like most professional athletes and contact sports athletes, we just really appreciate the martial arts and just sort of and what it takes to be successful.
Yeah, there's definitely a correlation there, and I definitely want to get into that. Talking about, you excelling, man, you did so well. I mean, Orange County Track Athlete of the Year. I mean, I went through your Wikipedia, obviously, and playing all these different sports. And then actually senior year playing football, playing a lot of tailback. So on the offensive side, obviously in high school sports, you see a lot of that, especially where I'm from, where we had really small teams. Everybody played 2 or 3 different positions, but you were on the offensive side of the ball. Talk about that a little bit compared to, where you spent most of your career playing D.
Yeah, I started like most kids. You started playing both sides. I was always a tailback, and then I played safety, sometimes played corner. Matter of fact, Tony Gonzalez, who also grew up in Huntington Beach, and pretty much from my sophomore year I think your sophomore or junior year in high school, whenever we played Huntington Beach High, it was Tony guard Tony. Because Tony Gonzalez was the middle linebacker, and I was the tailback, and then he was the tight end, and then they had me cover him as a safety. Then he goes to Cal, and we played each other in Cal, and he's at Cal, and I'm at Washington. And then we played against each other a couple times in the NFL also. So it was always fun, playing against him, just because it was sort of the old Huntington Beach, duel going at it again, which was always fun. But I loved playing running back in high school. I played a little wide receiver also. But something happened around my senior year of high school. I got to the point where handing me the ball was cool, but I wanted to take it away.
Yeah.
It's sort of that defensive thing sort of got in my blood, and I was recruited by the University of Washington to come to play some DB, and that was really it. Who
were some of you talk about Tony Gonzalez, but who are some other guys that a lot of people would know that were kind of in that conference with you, guys that you saw come up that ended up going to the league and excelling?
Well, you got guys like the lineman I'm thinking of right now named Kyle Murray. Kyle Murphy, actually. He went to Edison High School, and Kyle played, I want to say he went to Arizona State.
Okay.
I think he stopped in the league for a second. And at that time, there weren't very many of us. There were a couple of guys that came later. We're down in Orange County in Huntington Beach, California. At that time, especially, we had definitely more surfers than football players.
Yeah, not really a hotbed like some of these other areas. Yeah,
not really a hotbed. We had some guys. There were definitely some guys that made it to the Division I level and played, but not really a hotbed of guys going to the NFL at the time.
I got you. Well, you go up to Washington, obviously, man, have a crazy run there at Washington for the Huskies. And then I want to zoom right into getting drafted by the Bears, though. Second round draft pick by the Bears, 5th pick in the second round. I always want to know, it's from a personal standpoint, we've probably even talked about it, before, but what was that process like, man? Just draft night and knowing, okay, this NFL thing is happening. Kind of give me all those emotions.
Well, what really got me started was I had no idea. I wanted to go to the NFL. I'm, a guy with a dream, just like a bunch of my teammates. And all of a sudden, I started getting these notifications and letters and sort of agents popping up. And it was I remember my junior season, beginning of my junior season, when it was legal more like to sit down with an agent. I sat down with a guy and he was speaking to me. I remember his name was Jim Steiner. At the time, he was representing Jerry Rice was his big guy at the time. And I was sitting down in front of Jim, and I sounded clueless, as I'm sure most college athletes sound. He said, and at one point he said, "Kid, do you even know?" I go, "No, what?" And then he pulled out sort of some pre-draft projections. Yeah. And I saw myself on 1 or 2 on 5 different lists that he picked up at safety. And then that's when it hit me. I said, wait a minute. This is real. This is really going to happen. I had no idea. So I was going into my senior year, all right, let's go out and ball with my brothers out here for one last time. And then, be blessed enough to stay healthy and make it to the next level. So by the time draft day came, I knew it was going to happen. But the draft is always a crapshoot. I thought things change. Things change all the time. Guys get phone calls, says we're gonna draft you now. We're trying to get you now. This is what's happening. I know Chicago didn't think I was going to be there. They told me that they were trying to work out a deal with Denver to grab me in the lower end of the first round. They didn't think I'd be there at the 35th pick. So it was things were just crazy. And I remember sitting there, and I remember watching and watching a couple guys get drafted before me in my position that I knew I was better than. Okay, so it really puts a fire in your belly. So that draft day thing, I remember sitting there at my house One, I was a little annoyed because I told my mother, don't have a draft party, and she did anyway, right? Moms, they got to do what they want. Like, I don't want a draft party. Don't do it. This thing, you never know what's going to happen. I don't want a draft party. She did that anyway. And then I remember sitting there nervous and all these emotions going on as I'm watching. And I'm watching, what's happening. Then I see a couple safeties go off the board. And then I started getting – it was weird. I was nervous and I was irritated at the same time.
Yeah. So
I remember just sitting there, blessed that look. 35th pick, I went high. I didn't have to wait long at all, right?
Yeah,
but
sure.
And everyone goes through their own thing mentally. And I remember even that being a motivation for me, like, all right, let's get it. So much so when the media for the Bears, when they called me, once the Bears drafted me, they called me up and I spoke to the media then. One of the guys asked me, hey, Tone, you don't sound too excited. I go, yeah, man, I'm excited. I'm good. I remember going, yeah, I'm good. Don't worry about it. I'm excited because my fire was lit at that point too. I was like, okay, let's go to work. Cause
well,
so
man,
I wasn't the cheeriest, although, it's just sort of everyone's in their own mind at the time.
Sure.
I was definitely excited to go, but I also felt like I still had more to prove when I was ready to compete.
No doubt. Yeah. I mean, and you came right out of the gate, man. Started every game of your rookie year, which is awesome. And then you get paired up with Mike Brown, who I remember Mike Brown just being an absolute savage back then. Huh. I mean, between the two of you guys were intercepting everything that came through. And especially as a strong safety, because, it's usually your free safety that gets a lot of those grabs. It seems like that's always getting more interceptions. And I always picture the strong safety being the guy that's laying in those really hard hits, which obviously you did both, but you were obviously hawking a lot of balls, man. You had a ton of picks between the two of you guys, matched up with Urlacher, Ted Washington, Walt Harris, Azuma. I mean, you guys had a stellar defense. It seemed like the big year that you guys had, which I think was 2003, I believe, right?
It was 2001.
2001.
Yeah,
13-3. You guys were rolling. It seemed like with the Bears, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, maybe I'm off, but it just seemed like the defense has always been the trademark and the offense has just never quite caught up. And even though you guys were 13-3 that year and you were putting up some points, it seems like the offense just never caught up to what you guys could do on defense.
Well, in Chicago, it's a blue-collar town, and the team has always been built the same way. And for some reason, it still continues, the Bears have a hard time getting that quarterback consistency that's needed to go to the next level. And it's been a battle for a very long time. And during my years there, when I first got there, we had some lean years. We went 4-11. We went what?
Yeah.
4-12, 5-11. We had some really lean years.
Sure.
When I first got to the Bears, and I remember going in there, just years of going, man, our defense is pretty good. We just need to get that consistency, and so we just kept working at it. But I tell you this, those teams were actually some of the closest teams I've ever been on because we're together, we're working. We actually spent a lot of time building that camaraderie, going out with each other, especially like every Thursday night, we'd go out to restaurants. We'd break up as a defense. Sometimes we'd go just as DBs. Sometimes we'd take over a restaurant and we'd go offense and defense. We would just go out all the time. We were really close teams, and we knew we were just a couple pieces away. And after going, 4-10, 5-11, and what, 6-10 or something like that.
Yeah.
I forgot what it was. We weren't very good.
Yeah.
And in that 1 year, we got the click. We got some consistent play out of Jim Miller at quarterback.
Yep.
And everything just started going. Next thing you knew, we were 13-3 and we were rolling. Previously I was drafted. I was a free safety in college. So when I was drafted to Chicago, I started out as a free safety, and I made the all rookie team as a free safety, and I had like 111 tackles as a rookie. And then the next year they moved me to strong safety and said, wait a second, this guy likes to get his nose dirty a little bit. And they moved me to strong, and I had, 120 or something then. And I played strong safety. And then, so I played both interchangeably throughout my career. And when we brought along Mike Brown, Mike Brown's a great player in his own right. And it was a great compliment to what I did. And so I stayed strong, and Mike was at free. And, we both were able to, come down and get our nose dirty in the box, or both go to our, our home positions with him at free and myself at strong. And, we were a problem. We had a great defense up there. We had big guys like Ted Washington and Keith Traylor up front, which were like weight unknown with both of them holding things up.
Oh, my gosh. Ted Washington, a massive man.
Exactly.
Massive.
Well, even then, those were guys in the middle. So Ted was, weight unknown. And then and Keith was a 350 guy himself, 340, 350. And then we had Philip Daniels on our right end, who was about right about 298, 300 pounds himself. And then my man, Brian Robinson, rest in peace, over on the left side. He was another 300-pounder. So you got all those guys up front. And then behind them, you put guys like Urlacher, Roosevelt Coleman, and Warwick Coleman. And all of a sudden, the offensive linemen, they can't get to the second level. And you've got three linebackers back there that can just run. So I remember Brownie and I, by the time we got to that year, we went 13-3 in 2001. We would end the game be like, hey, how many tackles you get? I'd be like, 3. How many you get? 2. Like we were scrapping. We were scrapping just to get involved. Like we were jumping on piles because, a lot of the dirty work was done by the time we got there. And,
no doubt.
We had some great games that year, and Mike had some really memorable finishes. I think one of them, it was against Cleveland, where I think he ended up picking up like I don't know if it was a tip ball or a fumble recovery, and he ran in there for a touchdown and just took off up the tunnel and left the stadium. Another one I think was San Francisco. I think they threw a little slant towards T.O. actually. The ball was tipped. Mike took that one and ran that in for a touchdown. So we had a couple of games that went down to the wire. We won a bunch of games by 3 points.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot of close games, especially that season. It was crazy.
Yeah, we ended up going 13-3. That was a really, really a great year. And, winning what was then called the NFC
Central.
Central back then.
Yeah, before the North got into the mix. You're right.
It was the NFC Central. And we closed out the old Soldier Field.
Yeah, man, that's so much history there. And with the NFC Central, I got to know, because you always hear about the lore of these rivalries. Yeah. But how serious was it? I mean, when you're talking Bears Vikings, not Bears Packers, obviously. Lions a little bit, but definitely the Vikings and the Packers, man. You talk about those matchups. Was it really hyped up like way more than normal, or was it just another game for you guys?
No, it was serious business. And I also think about this. I came into the league at the same time as far as the Vikings. I came in the league with Randy Moss.
Oh man, come on!
Right, so you have to think
crazy.
This is Randall Cunningham throwing bombs to Randy Moss.
That team was nasty.
And Chris Carter.
Yeah.
Right, with Rod Smith at running back.
Yeah,
he actually ended up retiring. I don't know if I'm trying to remember if it was my rookie year or my second year, but he actually had the most yards of his career and ended up. I think he ended up going to medical school or something like that. So they had a great team. I remember going to Minnesota and being like, they have to be pumping air and noise, more like pumping noise in the stadium. Because it is just so loud. I remember my eardrums hurting.
Yeah.
And that horn, and the horn with the Viking biker guy going across. I remember going, man, it was crazy. Because I remember that year, I believe Minnesota, we were 4-12. We weren't very good. And they ended up setting records. I believe they might have led the league in offense that year.
Yeah, I remember that year pretty vividly. They came out of the chute and it was nuts. Is there give me a Randy Moss, like just having to deal with this guy? I mean,
yeah, Randy Moss, he was always a problem, but you're talking about a guy who was, who at 6'4", 6'5", is at any time is arguably the fastest guy on the field at the time. Yeah. So you had that with leaping ability. So, coverage was always a problem. He always had someone over the top of him. There always had to be someone sort of chipping him. The big thing at that time, especially when he first got in the league, was the fact that you wanted to get hands on him and be physical with him to sort of break up his route running and, and really put people around him to frustrate him. But when you're that big and that tall, you can try to contain him is really what it is. He's going to perform. And it was literally sometimes it was like Randall Cunningham with that long delivery was like cocking back and throwing the ball from his calves, and it would just launch. And you would just go up, because you knew Randy could go get it, right? So it was always a problem. But it was great being able to play against guys like Randy and Chris Carter, because as a player at that point, especially me personally, I'm not really seeing it as a fan. I'm just seeing it as competition, and I'm seeing it as my peers. And then in retirement, being able to go, man, I was able to compete against some of these great athletes that are Hall of Fame status and some of the best able to do it. It was definitely fun, and so Minnesota, that was crazy. And then of course there's always that Packers rivalry, which is it's one of the best in sports. It's hotly contested, but at the same time, it's like, Packers fans know their history. They know at some point George Halas from the Bears kind of helped them save their team, their franchise. They know their history. So it's like, I equate it to playing against your next door neighbor, right? Okay. So you want bragging rights, but at the end of the game, the Packers fans actually feed you. I remember hearing about this rivalry, and I'm used to collegiate rivalries where you literally don't like them in college. You're ready to fight every time, right? Yeah. Then you get in the NFL, and for this particular rivalry, unlike Pittsburgh and Baltimore, that's a little different. But with this rivalry, it's hard fought in the game, hard fought, and then after the game, they feed you. I literally remember seeing Packer fans. I remember they gave me this broth, and I remember walking into the bus and seeing all my teammates eating. That's crazy. That Packer fans gave them, and I've
never heard that before. That's wild.
Yeah, I remember asking one of my teammates, like, "We're supposed to eat this? We can eat these?" And I remember, hey, someone said, ATP, if you don't want it, I'll eat it. And I go, wait a minute, let me look at it first. Let me look at it. I didn't know we could actually eat their food. I'm thinking we had to have like food testers or something. I ate it. It was good too. They were grilling up the brats after the game and handing it to the opposing team. That's why I say it's a hard-fought rivalry, but it's good-natured at the same time.
Well, man, you obviously, man, you have that crazy year in 2001, 13-3, and then you make that move, man, at the height of what you guys had in Chicago. The business comes into it, and you end up going out to San Francisco. And before you even get started, you got to have a pretty serious operation, man, which is bananas, man. Tell us about that, man, because I can only imagine the emotions. You signed this incredible deal. I don't even know what the specifics were, but I'm sure it was pretty solid at that time coming off of that season. And then you're ready to start with the new team, and then boom, you're sidelined for a minute.
Yeah, my last, I want to say 4 or 5 games with the Bears, I started having trouble like in my abdominal area. So I would sort of strain an ab, and then I would strain my groin, and it would bounce around. So I spent the last 4 or 5 games where I didn't even practice. Yeah. All I did was play. I spent my time in the training room because my whole sort of central, abdominal core I was having problems. I literally laid and slept in the fetal position. And when I played that season, those last 4 or 5 games, when it came time for me to get up after making a tackle or something, my teammates, they knew I was going through this, would actually grab me and help pull me up. Wow. Because I had to get in the fetal position and roll up from my elbows because I couldn't just push myself up. And I was developing like all this scar tissue in my abdominal and my groin region, and I had no idea what was going on. So free agency comes, and I signed this deal with the Niners. I'm extremely blessed. Free agency it's exciting and frustrating at the same time, but I ended up being able to get the job that all the safeties actually wanted in free agency. I land that job with the Niners. They send me off to go get an MRI, and then it actually was a CT scan. And they go, look, what's going on with your whole abdominal region is no problem. You really had the beginning of like osteitis pubis. So it's like you're developing a sports hernia, but nothing's going to happen. We know how to reverse that. We'll be fine. But we see something else. And that something else happened to be a tumor that was inside of one of my testicles, in my right testicle. So here I am. I just flew to San Francisco. I arrive on a Sunday. And by the time Thursday hits, I'm on the operating table. And so I remember sitting there when the doctor told me, said, look, you got this mass. We got to deal with it. And I just go, all right, doc, let's do it. It happened so fast. I didn't really have time to react. I think, of course, my family reacted, much more severely than I did. And they were just, extremely nervous. And I was like, all right, especially when you're young too, I'm like 20 at the time, I'm like 25, and it's like, whatever, it's let's get it done. Yeah. So I remember the news sort of started leaking out a little bit, and my family was afraid to pick up the phone because they didn't know what to do. And I remember my first press conference as a 49er at the end of the first day of practice, the first post-draft mini camp of that year, right? So, of course, I'm not practicing and I'm there. And I remember being surrounded by media going, I'm really about to have my first major interview as a San Francisco 49er, and I'm just going to have to talk about my testicle the whole time. Right? Like, I'm like, great. All right. I remember saying to myself, you know what? Whatever. It happens. It's not like I was in trouble with the law. It's not like anything happened. Like I didn't do anything. I was just living and things happened. And at the same time, this is also when Lance Armstrong was doing his Live Strong campaign at the time from when he had testicular cancer. It was a blessing that mine was benign. So they removed mine and I was good. I actually started training 3 weeks later. I started progressively training again and also repairing the sort of the issues I had with the imbalance in my core. But I was like, hey, if this is part of what's been written for me, I've got no problem. Let's talk about this testicle, which actually ended up being very interesting because with that platform, I started getting letters from people who were empathizing and they were going through things themselves. Between some were cancerous and some weren't. And I remember later on, I had run into a guy which is one of my favorite fans in Chicago. I can't forget I forget his last name. His first name was Frank, and I'd see him all the time. And I remember going back to Chicago and running into him, and he told me that he had just got diagnosed with a testicular tumor also. And then, there was another gentleman I met who was a St. Louis Rams fan, he actually ended up giving his son, he had a newborn son at the time, I had a few conversations with him, and his son's middle name is Parrish. He's like, wow. You know what? I'm gonna give my son
that's
his
crazy.
Middle name is gonna be your last name. And I was blown away by it, and it just became one of those things where, as a young man, exactly, you could be embarrassed by it. You can not know how to really what to do next, and it's not something that you really want to talk about. And I remember just taking a deep breath and just going, forget it. This is part of my journey. It's not like I did anything, and then I became familiar with the numbers at the time of like how many, young men end up developing testicular tumors. And I was like, all right, if this is part of my platform, part of my journey, this is part of it.
No doubt.
And then,
no doubt.
I went through that season and, I healed well, and thank God everything went well. I ended up, we ended up winning the NFC West that year, and I ended up leading the league in interceptions, and it was a great year.
It's crazy, man. It's crazy. You're right. It's crazy how your journey it ends up being what it was. And talking about being with the Niners, obviously, the first person that pops into my mind is Terrell Owens. I mean, this guy was making so much noise at that time. And it was really that year before that he had the crazy catch and the catch from Steve Young, and then Garcia gets in there, and T.O. is just a household name, just like that. And of course, we know he'd move on to the Cowboys and do a lot of crazy stuff, even went to my Buffalo Bills. But that being said, what's it like being in the same locker room as Terrell Owens? I got to know.
I'd tell you this. I'd say one is T.O. is a better teammate than the media will allow you to believe.
Okay.
That is for sure. He had a group of guys that he used to help keep him in tip-top shape. And, I had a bunch of other injuries and things that kept popping up that season while I was playing. And he'd bring his own personal guys over and be like, help him out, help him fix this. As a matter of fact, after my first season with the 49ers, after he had introduced me to the guys that sort of keep him healthy, I actually flew out and stayed with T.O. in Lithonia, Georgia, stayed at his house and trained with like the same group of guys and stayed there and started my off-season training in Atlanta. And then I went back the next year and with the same group of guys again. I think what happens is he's very misunderstood. I'd say this: one, no one can ever say T.O. doesn't work hard. They can never say he doesn't perform. And you can never say that T.O. doesn't tell the truth. I think where it starts is that he doesn't really have a governor. He speaks his mind. So he's going to tell you what he believes and what he thinks at all times. And I think that, and what I know is that there are at the times when people didn't know how to handle that. You know, sometimes he spoke up and it may not have been the best time for the team and what's going on with the organization, but no one can say that it was a lie.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Yeah,
exactly. So, and I think what happens is the media started jumping on that, and you know, it became a bit of a runaway train, and it was unfair. It was very unfair at times, and so, you know, that's something I think that happens. And so, I say T.O. was very, very misunderstood as far as that goes. And I also, you have to remember, you know, T.O. comes up from a small town and a little school, and so what you've seen is
you're right.
You saw him become the heir apparent to Jerry Rice very quickly. Yeah. And you saw his maturation process, you know, out loud. And so I think you also have to remember that when you're looking at what he's done. And I think, and personally myself, I think it was a shame that he had to wait so long to go into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And I think right there is really a mark on the voters that made him wait that long, because it was really, you know, the Hall of Fame is about on-field performance. So regardless of what opinions you might have had of someone, you know, off the field or how they related to you individually, I think that's problematic. And I think that is part of also a little bit of that sort of shut up and play thing that they do with Black athletes. That is, you know, that's unfair. You know, and people have a voice and they can speak. And so that's not where the evaluation process should be done.
Yeah, he kind of paved the way. I mean, yeah, there's been a few guys, obviously, your Jim Browns, and if you want to take it way back. But you're right. I mean, he's one of those guys that kind of spoke out and wasn't going to be quiet. You know what I mean? Which you definitely got to respect that. And now it seems like these guys, obviously, between social media and everything that the athletes have now to have a voice, they have a voice more than ever. And I think it's a good place, man. And I think a lot of people welcome it. Obviously, there's a lot of people that are still in the dark ages that don't. But I think that for the most part, people welcome it, and they like that these guys have the voice, and it makes a huge difference. It really does, especially in the climate that we're in right now.
Yeah, and you also have to remember, when has sport not been a part of the social and political commentary?
Yeah.
As a country, we sat out of an Olympics as a political move.
That's right.
Right. So people get very short memories when it comes to, you know, athletes in sport having a social and a political position, you know, in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, I got to ask you just two more quick football questions. And obviously, when we talk about MMA and how brutal MMA can be sometimes in martial arts, I think some of the roughest things, I have a lot of friends through college. I was friends with all football players, all linemen, and they talked about just being in the pile and some of the chaos that happens at the bottom of a pile, pulling and guys just twisting and pulling. Yeah. Tell me about what's it like in there, man, in that pile? Some of these guys probably a little bit dirtier, some more than others, and has to be crazy in there.
It happens, and especially more on like the college level, especially on the high school level, and then I think it's heightened at the college level. Because in college, everyone you're playing against is like some, you know, invading force. Like they are the enemy, right? So when you're down there, it's, hey, you know, there's a guy that you don't like. Yeah, sometimes you might catch a poke, or someone might like pitch you in the tries, like do little things to sort of set you off, especially if there's a fumble, right? When you're down there and there's a fumble and someone's trying to get that ball at the bottom of the pile, it's whoever comes out, because the officials, they can't really see anything. That's why they're trying to get in there and see who has possession of the ball, right? So, by the time you get to the NFL, it sort of changed a little bit, right? So if there's a fumble, of course, guys are fighting for it. But at that point, you're now in a fraternity that really only has, 1,500 guys in the country, right? Or a little less than that, really, in the league is playing at the same time. You kind of have all some shared experience, and you see each other, around the country, sort of in the off season. You have familiarity from college or otherwise, and some guys switch teams. So it sort of changes that dynamic because there's a different sort of brotherhood. But what happens a lot in the NFL, on the bottom of a pile, when there is not a fumble, obviously, is resting. Guys are literally down there just resting, and you're waiting for someone else to pull off because, you only have another 30 seconds and you're back at it again.
Yeah.
So sometimes guys are literally just laying there like, all right, whatever. Every once in a while, someone will be in a bad position and he's like, get up, get off. Because I don't know, he's got too much pressure on his ribs or something.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of resting on the bottom of those piles once you get to the NFL.
Well, there's a lot of, and the other question is, there's a lot of outspoken players out there, especially wide receivers.
Right.
And you talk DBs, you talk wide receivers, and was there a couple of guys? Name a couple of guys, man, that were just over the top too much with the talk. I mean, because you hear it all the time. Even if they mic them up just for a little bit, it is nonstop. There had to be a couple of those receivers and a couple of those players that just kind of got under your skin, man.
Well, I'll tell you this. One is receivers talk. And why they talk so much? Because in their mind, all they need is the ball, and they're always open, right? So guys at
always open,
right? So guys in other positions, they tend to we have to rely on the person next to us more, right? You don't see a running back that talks trash like that because he knows he needs his lineman, and the last thing he needs is a defense with extra motivation. So running backs don't talk like that, right?
Yes.
Tight ends don't talk like that. It's always just the wide receivers. Yeah. And that's just the position. And from there, the guys that he's talking trash to, which are your corners and your DBs, of course, they're going to speak up. So that's why most of the trash talking happens out there, right? Yeah. And so there are always some guys that talk a lot, right? You had guys like Keyshawn Johnson talked a lot, right?
Yeah.
You had guys like Chad Johnson talked a lot.
Yeah.
You had guys like who else? Let me try to remember a couple guys that talked. I was one of those guys that were silent and I didn't like talking.
And see, that's what I would expect out of you, just because I've spent time with you and I don't see you being that guy.
Yeah. Especially as a safety, when I'm thinking about calls and checks and everything that's going on in the defense and making adjustments, I have other things to think about and I don't like talking. But I do remember times when I literally would walk up to a receiver, someone, and say, look, all this talking you're doing right now, I advise you to think about it because your mother does not watch the game to see what I'm going to do.
That's way too cool, calm, and collected, man. That'd be more scary than somebody being loud.
There were a couple guys where I had to tell them, stay outside the numbers. Because once you come inside those numbers, you're too close to me. And I promise you, this is not what you want. Why they're steady talking.
See, you're stressing me out right now.
Look, it's that simple because that's not what my game was. And so me personally, right? So I kind of had a mentality of I'm trying to make sure everyone is set and we're ready to go. But I didn't like it when those receivers were talking to my corners.
Yeah.
You're right, because I need my corners to stay confident and calm and feel supported. Kind of like how a lineman feels over their quarterback. That's how I feel with my corners. And when receivers started talking too much, that's when it was like, okay, it's my job that if I can get there, I'm definitely going to shut them up.
No doubt.
That was my mentality. And along the way, there are a few guys where I had to tell them, look, it's not why mom and granny watches the game.
Stay outside those numbers. I got you. Well, you transition, man. Obviously, you have a great career, and 9 years in the NFL is an accomplishment. It really, really is. I mean, guys, what they average maybe a couple. A lot of guys are in and they're out.
Yeah, I think
obviously you get everything that comes with that. Obviously, getting the NFL pension, and I mean that's something you got to think about, right? I mean, I'm sure a lot of guys that's just the battle by itself is to get those. What is it, 3 or 4 years? Yeah, I don't know what it is. I guess 3 or 4, right?
The average is, I think it's 3 years still. And I think as far as your pension has started getting invested, those things kick in like around 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So I think a young guy that I knew was telling me that the number of guys that have played like 5 years or longer, or 4 years, 5 years or longer, I think like that in the NFL, in the history is a number you wouldn't believe. It's like 6,000-7,000 or something like that. It's nowhere near as many people as you would think that have played, like 5 years or more or something.
Yeah, well, you transitioned from football and now, I mean, obviously a little bit in between there, but then you talk about getting involved with the fights, man, and being a part of this fight game. I got to wonder how you got into the fight game. Obviously, you're working with a guy that is a San Francisco legend there in George Chung, Master George Chung. Love that dude. And his connection to the Niners is crazy, and he's told me some stories that just blow my mind, man, especially as a football fan, that just are incredible. Some of the stuff with Jerry Rice, et cetera, and it's insane. But how'd you get involved with MMA and Combat Go and all that?
Well, George is one of those guys who's like when you watch those movies like Forrest Gump, when you just see all the like events in history and things that he's involved in. George is one of those guys. He's had about, he's already had 9 lives. Yeah. And so when I met George, it was because he was the martial arts guy for the San Francisco 49ers, who was also in like a coaching consultant position with them also. So his first 49er student was actually Ronnie Lott. Yeah. And then it grew from there. And at one point, Bill Walsh saw him and said, what are you doing? He spoke to George about it. And they also told him how he could use sort of martial arts to improve sort of hand fighting and body manipulation. Yeah. And Bill Walsh was such a visionary that he actually ended up hiring George, and he became not only their sort of special consultant. George became the guy that would literally coach and evaluate players on how they use their hands and their body. And that's how his career started.
And what a game changer that is, man. If you really think about that, there's some of the stuff that he was introducing, and he told me about it, and he's not even a guy that has to pat himself on the back. I mean, it's all there. But with the hand fighting and just the linemen, and it's amazing. I mean, it really changed the game when you talk about some of these different moves and swim moves and just different momentum. And it really is pretty incredible what he kind of brought to the table that a lot of coaches weren't even looking at yet.
Yeah, and the fact that a guy like Bill Walsh would go, wait a second, there might be something here. I'm pretty sure there were other teams that thought it was crazy that the Niners had a martial arts guy. Yeah. And so when I went to the Niners in 2002, he was still there. So I would, sort of complement my other training with working with George. We used to do all sorts of hand fighting and boxing and workouts, and I've got these pictures of George and I, like in the locker room pregame. I'm fully suited up, and George is stretching me out. And so he was one of my guys that got me ready for every game. And George and I just built up a relationship over the years. And when he created Jungo TV, and as he was building that, because his thing was always television content, he actually created a show called 49ers Total Access that allowed to sort of, the fan base, to bring together the Niner fan base to sort of look into what the team is doing. And it was also, he did it in multiple languages. So when I was there as a Niner, not only was I on the show as a guest, I then became a host. I ended up hosting a season of the show. And so that's how George and I really built our relationship. And then he moved on and continued in television content once he left the Niners. And he was the chief content guy for Crunchyroll, and ended up developing, once he left there, would become the sort of the foundation for Jungo TV. And, about 3 years ago, I get a phone call from him, and, we're just, we would meet up and hang out and have dinners. And all of a sudden he said, Tone, I'm working on something. And I think this is a project that you could be a part of. He says, come meet me and one of my partners. And I came down, I met him, in Hollywood, and we had some dinner. And the next thing I knew, he was like, can I steal you away from the company you're working with? I'm like, yeah, you can steal me away. Yeah. And then I started working with him, and we started, at the time we were helping, it was the Super Fight League, which is in India. They put on some fights up at the Emerald Queen Casino up in Tacoma, Washington. And we produced and did some stuff with them, and we try to help build that fight company. And that just was a part of just sort of the phalanges that spread out, that, and sort of transitioned over the years, and what's now is Jungo TV. So And within that, we have different properties and different channels. And I started getting heavily involved with Combat Go, which is our sort of fight culture and lifestyle channel. And so that's where, we've produced fights, we've produced, shows and docuseries, under that umbrella. So that's what I've been doing, and it's been great. So now we distribute our content. Some of it is fight content, our fight channels. We also have a K-pop channel. We have a music concert channel. We have probably about a dozen channels under our umbrella, and we distribute them domestically, and we also do it internationally. So we have partners in India. We have partners throughout the APAC region, throughout the Philippines, Vietnam. We're in Turkey. So that's what's sort of happened, and it all sort of comes back to that relationship that I built with George back in 2002, where he and I hitting the bags.
Crazy. It's funny how things come full circle. Combat Go, and just to even give more explanation, I mean, so much great content there, and you can find it on so many different streaming devices and services. And I watch it on Zumo personally, because I know if I turn it on, at some point in the day, I'm going to see myself announcing a fight. So I always like checking, just like, let me see if I'm on real quick. All right, that's cool. I'm on. So
absolutely, yeah. We're on Zumo. I think that's like 7:32 on Zumo. We also we're on Stir and we're on some other platforms.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So it's been great, and it's been fun, sort of building this thing, and we're blessed to be in an industry that during this sort of difficult time corporate-wise for a lot of companies, we're actually growing, because being in streaming and being in television and that aspect of streaming to entertainment, this is a time that's really proving out some of the projections that we had about where viewer habits are going and sort of where the market is going. So we've been blessed that this time that's been difficult for a lot of people has actually been pretty good for us.
Yeah. And you can actually catch right behind me there, North Star Combat, and you can catch right here on my shirt, UAE Warriors, both on Combat Go. That was a strategic move, what I did there. Definitely want to check them out. Man, I want to close it out, Tony, but, obviously you're a blue belt. You do some jiu-jitsu, which, who doesn't do jiu-jitsu now, but you've really fallen in love with it, and everybody that gets involved seems to really love it. Do you feel like maybe it was a missed opportunity that you never got to actually get in there and have that one-on-one fight, maybe have an MMA fight? Do you feel like that was a missed opportunity for you?
You know what? I don't know about it being a missed opportunity. Right now you're asking a guy who's very competitive still, but I've taken enough blows to the head. But
of course.
Right. But I'll tell you this. I wish I started training earlier. There was a time years ago that I had a buddy of mine named Michael Joker Guyman, who was down in Lake Forest, California, when I was living in the Newport Beach area. And I used to go down there, and at the time he was, I think he was a King of the Cage welterweight champion, and then he went and took a few fights in the UFC. And I trained MMA at his gym, and I absolutely fell in love with it. When I went down there, I never had so much fun getting roughed up. Like I was roughed up and beat up, and I loved it, and I couldn't get enough of it. And I was training MMA down there, and then I stopped for a while, and then in retirement, I said, I've got to get back in there. I had a buddy of mine, Andre Carter, who played with the San Francisco 49ers. Absolutely. And Andre said, Tone, he was always a martial arts guy himself, and he started training jiu-jitsu, and he said, look, you got to come down and check out where I train. And he wasn't there at the time, so I went down there. And so one day I literally walk in there in some shorts and a T-shirt to the academy in Beverly Hills where Higan Machado, with his studio.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there and I'm just watching it, and I was thinking, come on, my friend, you Andre, come on, my friend, come train. I just had no plan to train. I just wanted to come check it out. Because I had trained some like MMA before, but I'd never done like straight jiu-jitsu. I was like, no, I just want to check it out. It didn't work. And next thing I knew, I actually worked out that day, and I never left.
Yeah, that's it, man. That's it, man. It's one of those things that takes a hold of you, bro. It really does.
And I never left. So now, about about 2.5 years have gone by, and I've trained under Higa Machado, and unfortunately, a lot of academies are closed right now, where people getting their training sort of online and on tape and through Instagram and otherwise. But when everything sort of smooths out again, I'll be training again. It's actually one of my goals, is that to one day earn, to earn a higher level belt and achieve a black belt.
And we'll get you a grappling match, man. We'll get you a grappling match. We'll put it inside of a cage. They do it all the time now, man. We'll have some fun with it. Why not?
Yeah, but right now, man, I take it like this: being a professional athlete and competing at a high level in different sports, I understand the process. So for me right now, it's just all about submitting to the process and whatever it takes to get there, and to have a not only a competency, but a respected competency. So I'm one of those guys that, look, it doesn't, especially when you start training jiu-jitsu long enough, you realize that belt is a piece of cloth, right? Yeah. Really, once you get to a certain level, the belt's really a piece of cloth, and you're learning. And, it's like, submit me, beat me up, because I'm learning the whole time. But if you slip, I might surprise you.
I love it, Tony. I love it, man. Thank you so much for giving us some time today. I think we're going to turn this into a whole hour episode and roll with it. This is good content. We'll do it again. We'll even get George Chung on here, man. We'll get Master George on here. I'd have a lot of fun talking with him.
Whatever you like, man. I appreciate this. This is great. I appreciate coming on here, especially since I know you've been so MMA focused right now. So I'm the first really MMA fan that's been on your show, man. I appreciate it.
Hey, I want you got to make some calls, man. You got to bring me some more football players, bro. You call Urlacher and say, Urlacher, remember, you owe me one. Go on my boy's show real quick.
Whatever, man. Whatever. I'll definitely help.
I appreciate you, Tony. Thank you so much. Stay safe out there in Cali. And there it is, folks. There it is in this corner, wrapping up another episode as we switched over to football. How much fun was that? And hopefully we'll be able to give you more of that content, because I know you want to see a little bit of everything here. Check us out on all of our social media, and we'll see you next time on In This Corner.